What religion were you brought up in as a kid?
The cosmic zombie Jew one, the one where God sacrificed himself to himself for himself because he made a mistake of not putting a fence around a apple tree that Eve was then convinced to talk by a talking snake to eat of this tree. That one.
So Presbyterian? 100 putting me today. I really appreciate having you on my podcast, especially on such a short notice. I know that I just reached out to you a couple of days ago, but I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have the opportunity. Very cold here in Minnesota. Yeah,
especially this early in the morning when we're recording this. It's 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning.
Yep, I got my coffee. This is a Minnesota coffee.
What, do you take it black or do you put anything in it?
Tons of milk and sugar. I can't stand bitter. I can't even drink. I don't know alcohol because my tongue is just so sensitive to bitter. So just flood it with milk and sugar. I gotta say I'm an oat milk person. I know that probably makes me like a standard millennial, but I love honey. I love oat milk. That's the way to go. It's like a hug in a cup, especially when you add cinnamon. You should try it. I highly recommend it. So I first came across you as a person on Reddit a few days ago. And I wish I could remember who you were debating because I've watched a few videos since then, but you were debating an individual on the existence of God in this clip that I saw on Reddit. And got super curious, started doing some Googling, and it turns out that this is something that you do regularly. And I found a YouTube channel, I found your podcast, I found debates on other people's channels, and I even listened to a podcast that you had recorded for Only Sky Media. I just had a lot of questions. I was just curious to ask you about your personal journey through atheism. Now, I remembered in the podcast, you had talked about how in your effort to kind of meet and connect with other people, you had started talking to philosophers, like people who taught philosophy and professors and meeting them for coffee. Would that have any impact on whether or not you were an atheist? Were you an atheist first? How did you stumble into this, what's the word I'm looking for, this world, I suppose, of atheism? Yeah, so I had major depression for most of my life, and I got into philosophy as a way to try to cure that, as a way to try to learn how to cope, learn how to find happiness or whatever. And in my research of philosophy, I wanted to test my knowledge, so I'd ask professors out to coffee to talk with them about God and different philosophical concepts that I'd recorded on my phone and chat with them for a while. And eventually I ended up, from that experience, learning about the Four Horsemen, Hitchens, Harris, Dawkins, Dennett, those guys.
Yeah.
And identifying with their arguments is really when I started to agree with the label atheism. Before that, I had lost my faith around 17 or 18, and this was a more like 22, 23 range. And so I hadn't started to identify as an atheist until much later after losing my faith when hearing about these guys' arguments. And so, yes, it did have a big contributing factor to me identifying as an atheist, and getting into the atheist community was definitely my research into philosophy and understanding the academic arguments and the more academic positions on the matter, and seeing how most academics think the theistic arguments are absolutely terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you struggled with depression. Were you ever worried that what you would find, basically, for example, there's no life after death, things like that, would worsen your depression? Or did you always think that having that specific answer would help you? How did that impact, if at all, your depression?
Probably not at all, neither way, because my depression is based on a special interest. I have high functioning autism, so I have a special interest, and if I have the special interest, I'm happy, and if I don't, I'm miserable, and it's pretty much just black and white like that. And so whether or not there's an afterlife, I don't care as long as I have my special interest.
Interesting. So you mentioned having lost your faith around the age of 17. Was there a particular event or thing that you heard or learned that made you go that way, or was it just kind of gradual?
It was gradual. It was because of the major depression and praying every day for morning and night for help from a all-powerful, all-loving being who I thought was there and who cared about me more than anybody in the world, but did absolutely nothing to help. And that caused a cognitive dissonance in my mind that I couldn't shake. And after just praying for things to change and no response, I eventually lost the ability to believe there was such a thing. It's like you pray to a milk carton every day and nothing happens. Eventually, you're just going to realize it's just a milk carton.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And what religion were you brought up in as a kid?
The cosmic zombie Jew one, the one where God sacrificed himself to himself for himself because he made a mistake of not putting a fence around a apple tree that Eve was then
convinced to talk by a talking snake to eat of this tree. That one.
So Presbyterian. That's very interesting. And then did that impact at all your relationship with your family or close friends? Did they react negatively to your departure?
Not really. I did not have any friends at that point in my life, pretty much. And I didn't really talk to my family at that point. So not really.
Got it. And then do you remember the moment or moments where you were talking to these people who specialize in philosophy, you were having these meetings, you're getting this information, and you were like, I have to make something bigger out of this than just having conversations. Like I need to make this a podcast or a YouTube channel or get the word out in the way that you have?
Oh, that never happened. It was accidental. So I was recording the conversations for convenience and I'd upload them to my YouTube channel because I didn't want to waste the memory space on my computer. And that's the only reason. And people started to watch it. It didn't make money. So I was never like, I want to make this a YouTube channel.
That's awesome. Man, I wish I could just like upload my random thoughts and people would give me money. That'd be dope. So what's the most important aspect, in your opinion, to the work that you do and the word that you put out there?
Money.
Yeah, no joke.
That's a job. Awesome. That's the reason. I got into it as a means to try to overcome depression and turn it into a job. And so for me right now, it's just a job. It's like something I do to make an income. I don't really see it as like a super important message that I'm trying to get out.
Interesting.
There's a number of studies on like debates and how much impact debates have on changing people's minds, and only about like 2% of people are affected by debates, which is a lot. Like politicians would kill for those kinds of numbers,
right?
But my goal isn't to change minds. It's just to like have an occupation that doesn't involve going to work from 8 to 5.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to get there from the start of your journey to going full time?
I think I was full time when I had like 3,000 subscribers or something, because I had lots of very large donors, which is great.
That is great. I need to know how that works because that's not how my experience has gone.
I was selling Coke on the side.
Like, honestly, yeah, OnlyFans really helped. So what is the worst experience you've had, either on a debate or on another podcast? Has there ever been one where you're just like, damn, I don't even know if I want to mess with this anymore?
I don't know, because the way I classify experiences is more based on views. And so a lot of the things that would probably fit that would be the screaming matches I had with Jay Dyer or Darth Dawkins or Godless Girl, where we're just yelling at each other the whole time. But those are the ones that get the most views. And so right. I wouldn't ever say that like this is a kind of debate I wouldn't want to do again. Just because of like it wasn't fun or something. I don't think, maybe the abortion one I had where people talk over you and you don't get a chance to finish your argument when you're actually trying to make an argument. Those would be the ones I don't like. And the kinds with Jay Dyer where you're literally just trying to yell at each other and there's no point in making an argument. Those are actually kind of fun. So I'm fine with those.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was in debate for many, many years. And what always frustrated me was we'd have our debate round, and after the round, half the people would be like, oh, Sydney destroyed that guy. And then the other people would be like, that guy destroyed Sydney. And you're like, were you guys in the same room? How do you come up? So I guess maybe I thought that people assuming that the debate went differently than you felt it went might be really frustrating to see online.
Only if I lose.
I mean, is it hard to admit to yourself when you've lost a debate, or are there times where you're like, man, lost that one, it's done?
Yeah, there's a number of times where I know I've lost or did poorly. So I did one with a 9/11 truther guy, and he was well prepared. He did a lot of research. He had a lot of interesting points that made philosophical sense, and I just did not do any research on that topic. He did better. He was a pretty famous one too. I forgot his name, but that one I didn't have enough information on, and he won. Another one was my first discussion with Vosh. Was on topics that it was like the first time I had any conversations on these topics. And so I hadn't developed my position as well. And so I didn't do as well in that conversation. And so I can identify the ones I lost pretty easily. And it doesn't bother me that much because I kind of like that as a learning curve to be able to go into a debate and not do well, and then go into future debates and see my progress in those. Like I had another debate with Lonerbox on the same topic. And he just pretty much admitted I made the best argument of this position he's ever heard. And so after like 3 or 4 debates, I'm able to see my own progress and see how I've learned, which I think is useful for me, but also useful for people in my audience to see how to improve through successive iterations of a argument.
Yeah, absolutely. I think showing your audience you losing as often as you winning, I mean, hopefully not as often, but you're willing to show it to them just as much as you're willing to show them the winning, is one, really educational, really beneficial for all parties involved. And also, I feel like that level of humility makes you more trustworthy, maybe, and makes people want to follow you a little bit more. I've always thought that when I'm talking to somebody who's very, very religious and I ask them a question and they say, I don't know, I'm not sure, I always trust that person so much more than somebody who has like an answer off the cuff. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like seeing people that you admire debating on a regular basis and then also watching them lose with humility, or at least, partial humility, depending on how it goes. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. I really respect that. Do you think that your high functioning autism helps you in debate, hinders you, has any impact whatsoever? Do you think it impacts whether or not you take it personally when you lose?
I think it helps because there's a pattern I've seen with other people with autism, like Destiny, and there's another guy who I can't believe I don't remember his name. He's a good friend of mine, but a lot of the people who have autism seem very hyper focused on the logic of the argument, which I think does help a lot, because a lot of people can get distracted by the emotional cues, the triggers, the trigger words that get people thinking about other things and things you want to respond to that are completely irrelevant to the argument.
Right.
And the ability to hyper focus in on the real point that's being made and counter that is a crucial skill in debate, because people can shout out 30 different things. And if you can identify just the most important thing of what they said and defeat that, you defeated their entire argument, and you don't need to address all the other things they've said. And so the autism does help with that a great deal, I think.
Yeah. It kind of helps you avoid all those red herrings that would usually distract you and lead you astray when the main argument still stands. I remember when I was in debate, silence was compliance. So if somebody brought something up and you didn't touch on it, that was automatically kind of a point for the affirmative or a point for the negative. But I think in real life debates where you're not in front of a judge, you're in front of a layman audience, I think that is really important to be able to just keep going forward and be like, I'm literally not even going to address all this BS that you just brought up to try and distract me. We're going to stay focused on the main point here. That's really great. Were you ever in debate when you were growing up?
Not officially. I did a lot of sports. I did chess and football were the 2 sports I was in high school. I wasn't ever interested in formal debate because I think they suck. Like bad.
They do. They
make you do 30 hours of research, and you're just trying to spew out bullet points, which are not compelling to anybody, and no one cares, and none of your audience is listening. And it's all just some kind of an academic exercise. It's totally pointless. YouTube debate actually has some purpose and is actually focused on topics, and you actually make progress. Formal debates are garbage.
Yeah. Although I do think you would like IPDA debate specifically. That's the kind that I did. It was
the kind where you drink an IPA. Is that?
I wish IPA debate. It just gets like sloppier and sloppier the further into the 6-pack you get. But it's based very much on like a presidential debate style where, because I know that there's, Lincoln Douglas and all the ones where it's more about how fast you can talk or whatever. This one, the point was the judges were all lay judges. It wasn't like people with PhDs, things like that. And you had like 25 minutes to prepare an actual topic. It could be a philosophical topic, a sports topic, a news topic. It was very interesting. It was very casual, but man, it could be really infuriating. It could be so infuriating. Well, that's super duper interesting. Has there ever been a debate where you've refused to participate that you've been offered?
The ones that don't pay me, yes.
Oh, yeah? Really? That's awesome.
Yes, I charge money for unsolicited debates, and it works well. I like that. That's a good strategy to weed out the trolls. There's a lot of that happens where people just want to invite you to their Discord server just to like trash on you or whatever. And I'm like, if you're going to pay me, I'll come. Sure, let's do it.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Have you ever been like fly trapped like that on accident?
Not by accident, because I've been charging money for a long time.
Yeah, you're like aware. That's great.
Whatever,
you're giving me so many ideas. I've been doing so much stuff for free. Why am I not making money doing this? That's great. And then Do you ever think that what you do now with your podcast and your YouTube channel, do you think that'll ever take you even further? Like, would you publish a book, or would you become a professor of philosophy, or are you pretty comfortable with just the way things are now?
I'd like to continue to make money, so I'm definitely not going to become a professor of philosophy.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm already working on a book with a co-author on a debate on which model of morality is better, a theist model or an atheist model. And so I am working on books right now. I would like to transition into other kinds of occupations. I would like to be able to turn this into kind of a business model. I'd like to start an atheist church. I think that would be phenomenal, where we could gain donations, take advantage of all the different tax benefits, be able to create employment opportunities for the Clergy Project, clergy members who are atheists who have lost their jobs or are still in their jobs as clergy, for Christians. And if we have atheist churches, we can just, hey, be a pastor at my church and do all of the work for me. I'd appreciate that.
So there are atheist clergymen? Yep.
There's a lot of them. Clergy Project was, who is that? Dan Barker? I think Dan Barker started that. I'm not sure. They are people who were Christian but lost their faith, but they went through all the seminary stuff. So their entire education is how to be a pastor. And so they got a job as a pastor, lost their faith. But now if they admit they're an atheist, they lose their job. And so they can't support their family, and they become homeless. And so they have to maintain their position as a clergyman and lie every day, because if they don't, they can't feed their family. And so there's lots of these. The Clergy Project is like a website of a anonymous group of thousands of them across the world.
Now, just out of curiosity, do you think that somebody who would rather take a job where they lie every day as opposed to take a job in, say, like retail or food service or something like that, do you think that makes anybody a bad person? Do you think that makes them just as bad as, say, for example, what we say about the megachurch pastors who take money from people when they know they're not telling the truth? Like, what do you think the difference there is?
Well, the difference, one, is that they weren't lying initially, is that most of these people were genuine Christians when they got into the job, and now they don't have the choice of just picking a different job, because pastor jobs pay extremely well. They are very well-paid jobs. These are like $60,000, $70,000 a year jobs.
I had no idea.
And they get tax benefits, and the church pays for your housing, and it's untaxed.
That makes a lot of sense.
And anybody who's an employee for the church can say they're a called employee and then put any amount of their income towards their housing, which is not taxed. And so these are potentially $100,000 a year jobs, if you take all the tax considerations. And saying, well, they can trade that to become a Walmart employee and get like a third of that a year is not really a realistic comparison. Like, given that they have really nice houses and really nice jobs that they obviously shouldn't be obligated to try to lose.
Right.
I'm not, and they didn't like deliberately go into lying. They're just stuck in a position where they can't really be honest about their beliefs because they will get fired by their employer, which they shouldn't have to do. I think that in and of itself is a crime. So I'd say that would be the difference, is that they didn't go into this knowing they're lying. They went in being honest, lost their belief honestly. And now if they tell anybody, they'll lose their job. And so I don't think they're doing anything wrong. They're just in a very difficult situation.
Right. And I feel like that the same thing goes for anybody who has a job that's related to something kind of like anybody who's in insurance, anybody who's in any of these fields where the outcome is a lot of times viewed as like theft or like harming people, rejecting insurance claims for health problems. And I can see how that would be kind of similar, where you're like, why would you have such a slimy job if you don't believe any of this, or if you think it's wrong? But at the end of the day, if your housing and your family and your food and all of that depends on this job, it would be very difficult to leave, especially for a lower paying job where you might probably have to get 2 or 3 of them in order to make the same amount of money or keep your home. So that makes sense. I didn't think about the aspect that their homes are often tied into that. That makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
If you could, I remember I was listening to the podcast that you did on Only Sky, and you were talking about your atheist church. What would you say? You spoke about this a little bit, but I was wondering if you could go into more detail. What would you say to somebody who's like, so you're telling me that church is bad, but now you want to make your own church? What's the difference? Like, you're an atheist, you don't believe in religion, but it sounds like you want to start your own religion and make money.
Yeah, no pedo priest. That's the difference. Other than that, the tax advantages that are given to churches allow them to have a lot of say in politics and in policy and those are huge advantages that we in the atheist community should be taking advantage of. Also, churches are very, very good at many things. They are phenomenal at building communities, phenomenal at providing opportunities to help people, to meet people. And so churches offer a social safety net for everybody around in the area. That is a huge advantage that we just don't have as much in the atheist community. There are a few secular churches around that have started up, which are very admirable and working in the progress, but I don't think they do enough. I think that they do follow the church model too closely. I think one of the problems with churches is that they don't do anything legitimately to help, or very rarely. Like, there's a program here in Minnesota called the NOAA Impact Fund, naturally occurring affordable housing. So they buy apartment buildings and offer rent at affordable rates. And there's like one church in the area that I think that does the same thing. But if all churches did that, that would be, I think, what a church should be, is providing those kinds of opportunities to solve real world problems for most people in a capitalistically productive way. Because they're still making money off of those potentially to some degree. And I think if I was able to start a church, I'd focus it more on creating those kinds of businesses to help people, like creating affordable housing or creating an alternative, a private tax corporation thing that can just do taxes the way the Europe does it, where the government sends you a bill, you pay the bill, and you don't have to do any TurboTax or anything. That's, if I could create a private institution that could do that, or get a license from the government to do that, that would save millions of people millions of dollars. And so I would want to build the church around taking advantage of the opportunities they have to benefit people in the way that most churches don't.
Interesting. Very good. Let's see. Right. And you said it was called NOAA Impact. I'm writing it down.
That's the local one. Yeah, it's
Got it.
A nonprofit that provides affordable housing. I think their goal is to have 1,500 units. Right now they have about 1,200 units.
Wow. And have you ever, in all of your debates, have you ever heard a religious point? Because I know you mentioned the 9/11 truther. Have you ever heard a religious point made from a religious person where you're like, that's a really good point? That kind of makes me question my own beliefs a little bit.
Sort of. So I think the best arguments I've heard for God are the from Hinduism. So I would debate Hare Krishnas, and I've debated people from pretty much every religion. But one of the arguments they said is, in the Vedas, it predicts the age of the earth is 4.3 billion years old. And that's pretty close. It's like 95% accurate. I was like, that's a really good prediction. Like, no, it can't. No, there's no way I could say that. So I Googled it. I was like, yep, it literally predicts that. It gives you very specific numbers. It's not arbitrary. It's like, yep, that's a very highly accurate prediction. I'm like, damn, that's real evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think they just kind of at some point partnered with science to discover that? Or do you think they were actually told that by a higher being? How do you think they came upon that information?
Space potatoes, but well, this was written 6,000 years ago. So this is like one of the oldest texts in human history. So there's no way science had no access to this information back then.
That's wild.
I think it was a lucky guess, and they're technically still sort of wrong because they think we're only halfway through one of the days of Shiva or whatever, and Brahman, one of the days of Brahman. So their technical prediction is it's only 2 billion years old, because 4 billion is the complete day when it would be destroyed. So they're if you actually read the text, they're not exactly accurate, but that number is very close to the real number.
Pretty damn close. Would you say that they're the hardest religion to debate, or is there one particular religion that's super hard to debate for any reason?
Scientology, because they harass you a lot. They're not fun to debate.
They just don't seem like fun in general, to be honest with you. Like, they don't even seem like they have good casserole at their meetings, like some of us do.
It's true, but they have money. And so I'd hang out with Tom Cruise and be like, I'll take the million.
I'm noticing a pattern here. You're like, listen, I'm a Scientologist now. I've decided I can make a lot of money.
That's right. Other than that, I don't think so. I think like the ones, it's more based on individuals than religions that makes it hard. People's personalities. Darth Dawkins, he's very difficult to debate because he will only debate when he has control of the room, and he will only let you get like 5 words out, then he mutes you. And so you have a very, very limited amount of time to make a valid point. It's a very difficult time to debate.
That's dirty. That's somebody who doesn't know how to debate. And if he hears this, that's me saying you don't know how to debate properly.
That's right.
That's wild. I've never muted somebody during a debate. Granted, I did most of them in person and I wish I could have, but I still wouldn't have done it. That's wild. And then have you ever had people who identified as atheists disagree with you?
Yes, all the time. That's a common theme. So I believe in objective morality.
Okay.
Most common atheist lay people do not. They think that has a very religious vibe to it. Ironically, most academic atheists do believe in objective morality. And so I get a lot of disagreement on that one for sure. Also, I lean centrist, so I'm not on the left as much, whereas most of the people in the atheist community are very on the left. And so we disagree on politics, economics a lot.
Yeah. And for somebody who's never heard of objective morality, how would you define that?
Stance independent moral truths means that there's some fact of the matter of morality being there independent of our opinions. It's not subjective, it's not cultural, it's not evolutionary, it's a thing in the universe, kind of like a law of physics.
Got it. So morality is a natural occurrence that we are either drawn to or pushed away from, but it'll exist whether or not we agree with it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then other atheists, what have they said about it? What was their kind of pushback on that? Do they believe that they control their morality?
Mostly think they're subjectivists, relativists think that it's a cultural thing, socially constructed, not objective, but subjective.
That makes sense. I mean, I disagree, but that makes sense. Interesting. And then how old were you when you did your first debate? What was the first time you ever, specifically on religion, I suppose?
I have no idea.
Do you know if it exists out there on the internet, or was it before you were recording them?
No, it was before I was recording. I know the first one that was the most impactful was my conversation with Greg Boyd and Paul Eddies. They wrote The Jesus Legend. They're local here in Minnesota. And I went out to them with coffee, and that was where I built my original model of epistemology, the 3 tiers of knowledge. And so that one was probably the most important one I had. I was definitely talking with pastors and things even before I started talking to professors, but they just didn't know anything. And that's why I moved up to professors. So I've been having these for a while.
You're like, you guys are boring. I'm going to talk to somebody who knows stuff.
Yep.
What are your 3 theories of knowledge?
That there are 3 kinds of knowledge: conceptual, empirical, metaphysical. Conceptual is stuff in our head, so logic, intuition, math, things that you can know by thinking about it. Empirical are things that you need to verify independently of being able to think about it. So experiences, the external world, other minds, that kind of stuff. And metaphysical are absolute truths, things that are absolutely certain and can't be false. And each of those things requires different levels of evidence to justify.
What would be an example of a metaphysical truth that you
I think, therefore I am.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't exist. I'm just a zombie.
Well, no, I thought you meant from the biblical sense. I was like, because the God says that in the Bible, like I am that I am.
No. So I think, therefore I am. It's Rene Descartes. So Descartes is this one. It's cogito ergo sum. It's the position that you can't believe you exist and be wrong at the same time.
Interesting. So you can't disbelieve you exist and be correct.
Well, you can disbelieve you exist and be wrong, but you can't disbelieve you exist and be right.
Right, exactly. Interesting. Wow, that is meta. Do you believe that people who are super religious, say, for example, evangelicals or fundamentalists, lack all 3 or one particular of these 3, in your opinion?
It's more like religious claims are making metaphysical claims based on conceptual evidence. So they imagine stuff and they use their imagination as a basis of evidence to try to justify claims that are way beyond what that basis of evidence can justify. So like the fact that I imagine that there is a dragon in my basement is not evidence that there's actually a dragon in my basement. You need empirical evidence for that.
Yeah.
The fact that I imagine there's an all-powerful sky daddy that created the universe is definitely not evidence that there's an all-powerful sky daddy that created the universe. And so most religious people are using their imagination to try to justify metaphysical claims, which is even worse than using your imagination to justify empirical claims.
Right. And in your opinion, why do you think that the original religious people would have imagined so many rules that are inconvenient to human life? Like, why do you think if they're going to invent a religion that we all have to abide by, why does it need to be so difficult? And I guess I specifically mean Christianity, but any other religion with staunch rules. What's the benefit to that, do you think?
Well, religion was actually incredibly beneficial from an evolutionary perspective. That's why it's so prevalent in human society. The ability to get people to identify a single like ideology that they can group behind and have in common and start communities with, and identify an in-group and out-group that promotes social cohesion of some kind. All of those things had a massively positive impact from a cultural perspective, which is why religion is so successful. And so those rules, many of them were useful at the time period, whether they realized it or not. And so the fact that they were useful to that culture is why they were imparted into the Bible. Now they're completely useless. That's why we don't think eating shellfish is immoral. But back in the time, it made sense to make up a bunch of rules that identified the social values, because that was the most accurate representation they had of things that help them function in reality. And so, yeah, religion was extremely useful. It's kind of outdated, kind of like using a spear to hunt today, but it was at the time an extremely useful benefit compared to previous ideologies.
And then do you think it was just too difficult to give up, or do you think people found, like especially the leadership, found benefits in their control by leaving it relevant? Do you think they actually continued to believe it as opposed to like pulling the wool over people's eyes? What do you think happened after it was no longer useful?
Well, it had this one big downside, which is that it's unchanging and universal, and it applies to everything even after you die. And so even if it was useful at the time period, it had an evolutionary advantage. Now it has an evolutionary disadvantage of that it's trying to maintain those same ideologies from the past, which are completely useless. And because it has this tie into afterlife and God and all those kinds of things. And so because it had that extra baggage, which makes it hard to give up, people are still continuing to use it today, and it's harder to transition into newer ideologies.
And do you think that all the benefits that came from the original religion that was so helpful, do you think those exact same benefits could have come from, say, for example, a group or a formation that didn't necessarily involve a deity? Do you think they could have gotten the same from what we would now consider maybe groups that do community service, things like that, like homeless shelters, things that help the community but don't really have anything to do with religion? Do you think that would have been possible, or did they need the deity aspect present as well in order to get people to kind of comply to it?
I think at the time they needed the deity aspect. I think they needed that kind of authoritarian implementation of some kind of rule system that made them obligated to do things. And so the idea that there was a God out there judging them based off of certain actions, kind of like a universal video game system that you get points if you do these kinds of things and you lose points if you do these kinds of things, is extremely motivational for people to get them to do stuff. Whereas if you have a secular model that doesn't have that kind of video game-esque application to the world, it wouldn't be as motivating to people. Now in the modern times, I think it's different because we have different kinds of value systems than they did at the time. And so as people gain more resources and freedom and intellectual capabilities, we don't need as much motivation to act in certain ways. And since we have more freedom to express our own desires and individuality and find our own motivations, we don't necessarily need an overriding one to guide us in a particular direction as much.
Would you say that people nowadays kind of tap into that morality much more than they did back then? Do you think back then they needed more guidance to tap into morality, or they just had entirely different morals?
Well, so I believe in a thing called moral progress. I think that as technology grows and our resources increase, then we have a proclivity to become more moral individuals, more moral culturally. And so back then, because they had a much more limited amount of resources, they'd be much more harsh in their moral intuitions than we are today. And so even in a religious context, I don't think religion changes this. Religion is a part of moral progress. We can see that in like progressive Christianity, where today Christians are becoming more accepting of the LGBT community. And even if we look at the more extreme versions, like the Bethlehem Baptist Church or something, even though we consider them extremists today, if we compare them to religious people 400, 500 years ago, they would be the progressive Christians of that day, because they're not literally burning witches at the stake or whatever.
Right.
And so as time goes on, the morality of our society increases due to moral progress, and people apply their moral intuitions to their religion and try to interpret religion through their own intuition perspective. And so I see this going on throughout time. And so it wasn't that they were like in the past on a different moral system. They were just not to the point where they had enough resources to be able to express the level of moral freedom that we have today.
Got it. And is that what you would say? I'm sure you've been asked this before, but say, for example, a religious person were like, on one hand, you're saying morality exists no matter what. And on the other hand, you're saying morality can change or be different. Would that be your answer there as well? That it's always been the same. We just didn't have access to it in the same way?
Yeah. So I think there's always been a moral extreme of what the best of all possible worlds would look like. And we as a society are getting more sensitive to that as we gain more freedom from needs of resources and intellectual freedom.
Yeah. And what do you think it is about human beings that makes us able to access that? Do you think it's empathy? Do you think it's the literal formation of our brain?
Probably a combination of both intellect and emotional empathy.
Interesting. And do you think that because of this idea that religion was kind of invented or created as more of like a survival aspect and a developmental aspect for human beings, do you think the very first person to ever promote the idea of like a deity, do you think they were lying? Do you think they actually believed it? Do you think they wanted to believe it?
Schizophrenic, most likely. There's a really great video on YouTube from a Stanford professor, Robert Sapolsky, where he did a explanation of the origin of religion as potentially schizophrenics, potentially having experiences where they thought they saw gods and then expressing those with high levels of confidence, which would get people to follow them because we were evolutionary trained to be attracted to confidence. And this would lead to a group communal reinforcement bias of this experience being adopted by a large group. And that would be the origin of religion.
Interesting. And do you think that Jesus ever existed? Or
Yep.
do you think you think so? What is your opinion on who he probably was? Also schizophrenic?
A short, brown, Jewish communist.
There you go. I was just talking to somebody on a past episode about how if you met the real Jesus, he would make most devout evangelical Christians very uncomfortable and they would not want to get on the same plane as him. They would be racist and they would probably say very ugly things about him. So that's very interesting.
Yep.
Do you ever do research that changes so I'm trying to think of like a better way to word this. Have you ever done research that changed your mind in a way that you did not expect and you're still surprised by? Or are you always open to finding ideas that differ from what you believe at the moment?
I guess I've never really been surprised like that because I don't really care what the evidence says. I just follow the evidence wherever it leads. I don't really care what it actually indicates. I guess one thing where I was proven wrong or had to correct a belief was more like my position on fallibilism. I had a couple of debates with a few academic professors who were theists, and we were talking about knowledge, and one of the arguments they brought up was that knowledge doesn't require certainty. And that was unintuitive to me, like that you could know something without a 100% knowing it. And that's the position fallibilism states, where you can have evidence that indicates a position is more likely, but not know it with certainty and still say it's knowledge. And that part was something I had to learn more about in philosophy that I did not understand at the time.
And do you have an example of a scenario or a piece of information that you feel that way about, where you know it to be truth, but you don't necessarily know 100%, or you're not quite on board with it yet, even though it's more likely?
I am the sexiest, smartest man on the planet.
There you go. Sexiest, smartest man on the planet. That's what I'm going to title your episode. I'm just going to, and everybody will be like, oh, it's TJump. Yeah. For sure.
Yep.
That's really great.
It's in the dictionary. There's a picture of me there.
That's really funny. How do you think that somebody becomes a high level academic and also remains a theist? What do you think happens in their mind?
So there's a number of studies that show that the more intelligent you are, the higher ability you have to make evidence fit your preconceived beliefs.
Oh, interesting. So you think that they just have better and more advanced ways of making the evidence fit what they want it to fit?
Yeah, I think that's true of all humans for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I think that the advantage to science is that the methodology requires a higher level of justification than just your ability to conceptually get the evidence to fit. You actually have to demonstrate it in some degree. And that's why if you accept that as your epistemology, you won't remain as religious because you can't demonstrate any of the religious stuff. It's mostly just a conceptual framework.
Right. Yeah. I definitely feel like I've met two types of academics, especially through the nature of this podcast. I meet the kind that the more intellectually involved they become and the higher level their degrees go, the more open to different ideas and being proven wrong they are, which is usually the scientists. And then on the other side, we have the people on the more like artistic side that I feel like, as you kind of stated, that it's almost like they know higher level words to convince you they're correct, as opposed to researching the idea that they might not be correct. They just learn better verbiage and more expensive words to describe exactly what they already believed before they bothered looking into it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the beauty of science, is that it uses people's biases against one another. So we're all equally as biased in science, but in science, what you have to do is you have to convince other people of your bias, and they're using their bias to try to destroy your bias. And so the only way that your idea can thrive is if it's so good that it can bypass the other people's bias. Which isn't the case in like art or whatever. They just take their own bias and just say whichever one's prettiest, and that's the one that gets adopted.
Right.
And so science using people's biases against you and trying to find a way to validate the ones or show that one is true by the inability to destroy it. It's so good you can't destroy it is a great methodology to filter out bias to the best of our ability.
Right. And I definitely think there's a big difference that a lot of people don't catch in having 21 examples of how you've proven this fact to be correct versus 21 examples of why you think the other person's wrong. And it doesn't actually prove what you're trying to say. It just makes the other person look like an idiot. And you think that's the equivalent of having proven yourself correct.
Yeah. Evolution is true, therefore evolution is false, therefore God.
Yes, exactly. And very interesting. Has there ever been a religion that was even remotely attractive to you in terms of like, if I had to pick one, this one would probably be the one?
The ones with cults that have lots of very attractive women in it, that would be probably the one I would go for.
The ones with hot chicks and tasty Kool-Aid.
Yep.
Are there hot chick cults out there?
Yes, lots of them. Most of them are like yoga instructor places.
There it is. That makes sense. The crunchy granola ones. I was going to say, where's this hot chick one? I'm just going to, for science, I just want to interview them just for science.
It's the oat milk and avocado toast places.
Listen, I'm in a cult now. I'm so sorry. That just sounds delicious. I mean, I'd want to be in a cult that started my day off that well every single day. Maybe not though. Have you found that your ability to kind of accept that, say, for example, there isn't a God, that religion isn't, that Christian religions and God-based theist religions aren't true? Do you find that helps you in your journey to kind of interact with people more and to meet more people and to make more friends? Or do you think it hinders you or has no impact whatsoever?
I guess it sort of hinders me. I think if you are religious, you have an instant in to talk with thousands of people of all varieties. And so not having that isn't in a way a hindrance. And so I have to go to extra lengths knowing I'm an atheist to be able to communicate in those communities. So I definitely think that's a disadvantage, especially in a city where there are massive like youth, young adult pastor groups of just tons of extremely attractive people here that I don't have access to meet and talk with, which is very sad.
Yeah. And only because you seem very like straightforward and honest. When you meet somebody and they're like, oh, I'm very religious, is your first thought like, oh, or are you interested in talking to them? What's your first reaction when you meet somebody who you're jiving with and then you find out they're very religious? Or do you not jive with very religious people very often?
Well, I do. I have a lot of them actually. So I go to a volleyball group who is of a church group and a lot of religious people there. And I hang out with them as much as possible. We just went to a bonfire a few weeks ago. I don't care particularly. I don't see much of a difference between someone who says they're very religious and someone who doesn't. I think it's just a particular kind of a bias because I see most atheists as equally as biased, just in other contexts, usually political ones. So when I first meet someone, my initial thoughts are, how can they meet me? Can they help me meet the people I'm interested in? Can they help me benefit my job or help me grow my dreams? Those kinds of things. What their personal beliefs are really don't matter to me. Like if I met Tom Cruise, I'd be like, please introduce me to Scientology. Tell me the story of the volcano nuking.
Yeah. I feel like I scare religious people because I have this podcast and I interview people who are atheists or evangelical. I interview everybody. So when somebody's like, yeah, God really means a lot to me. And I'm like, tell me more. They've never had somebody that interested, and it kind of scares them away. Like the other day I had a couple Mormon girls try to give me a book, and I was so excited to take it that I could tell they almost didn't want to give it to me because they thought I was like a weirdo. But have you also found that, this is in my experience, but I'm curious about yours. Have you found that it is easier to find intolerable people who make atheism their entire personality than it is to meet, say, very, very Christian people who make Christianity? I find it's very even split. But I was curious your thought process.
Well, I think because the atheist community is newer, the people who are most likely to transition from one ideology to the other initially are always going to be the most virulently proactive, let's call them. And so if any new ideology is adopted, the people who you are going to likely find in that ideology are probably going to be the extremists. The same is true if people leave an ideology. If a ideology is dying, the last people to leave are going to be the most extreme. And since atheism is relatively new, it's more likely that a higher percentage of the atheist community are going to be the more virulently outspoken kind, simply because it's newer. So in that way, probably, but I don't think it's like strange. I think that's true of all ideologies.
Yeah, I found that my favorite types of atheists are the people who I have to do a lot of research to find out they're atheists, because they go by philosopher or psychologist or scientist or doctor. And then you find out through researching them as a person later on, maybe they did a podcast or something or a speech. Then you find out, oh, and because of that background in science, they are also an atheist, as opposed to going on like Reddit atheism or whatever and just like hearing people, I'm an atheist and that's what I am. And you're going to hear it. And if you don't, just the people that act like everybody who's not an atheist is an idiot. But I think you're right. I think that goes with any group, any club. That goes with runners, CrossFitters, vegans, gingers like me. I feel like if you make it your whole personality, it's just obnoxious. But well, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you taking your time to kind of give me some insight and some background on your thought processes. And I have to say, I've been very intrigued by, I watched some of your videos on your YouTube account, and I think you have a very unique way of being respectful, but also communicating very directly. I love that you like make your point come across like there's no ambiguity on your beliefs, but you also seem to respect everybody that you're debating to a level, especially the ones that are going really what I as an audience member might be like, oh, this is getting really intense. You still respect those people even when you're fighting with them. It's the most interesting vibe. And it's hard to come across people that are good at both. And it's almost more infuriating for the other person that you can yell at them and also have this level of respect when they want to make you look bad. So kudos to that. I don't know how you develop that skill. I still have to work on that.
Well, but obviously you haven't seen the flat earth debates, but okay.
I'm going to look that up. I'm going to look that up next. I'll link only those. I won't link anything else. Just kidding.
Yes.
But that being said, if somebody's listening to this and they're on the fence, maybe they grew up religious and they're not sure they still believe, or maybe they grew up atheist, but they're curious about religion. Like, what would you say to somebody who's on the fence about whether or not they should be agnostic or atheist, or whether they should continue their pursuit of religion?
Do what makes you happy. Forget the truth.
Do what get you money. I thought that's what you were going to say. Chase that money. And then is there an organization that anybody can find and donate to that will help you kind of meet your goal of that future atheist church / organization / outreach program? Is there like a website we can go to learn more or donate money?
I have a GoFundMe on my Twitter page for the Atheist Church. If you're interested.
Perfect. I will.
My Patreon page, my bank account works great. I sell some merch.
Perfect. I will link all of those things in the show notes. Well, those are all the questions that I had for you today, but I really appreciate your time, Tom. I really respect what you're doing with your channel, with your career. And I hope one day to meet you at this atheist church in the future and just celebrate the things that it's doing for the community and for groups. But on all seriousness, I really appreciate that you are promoting debate and education and belief and the pursuit of knowledge. I think it's really important.
Thanks for inviting me on. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it was a great chatting with you.
Excellent. Well, then I will let you have your Saturday back, and I will send you the links to everything as soon as I have them, and I will link all of your channels in the description.
Thanks. Nice talking with you. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.